Welcome everyone, and I was just about to greet our experts. So good evening again to Shiori Kano, our moderator, to Professor Kiryu Minashita from the Kokugakuin University, and to Professor Guro Korsnes Christensen, our guest from Norway, from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. So this is our second event of the Women in Japan series, and last time we presented an overview of prospective subjects, women in business, in politics, and in society. At that event, we did some stock taking of the current state of play. We discussed with Minister Seiko Noda the environments that either support women or keep them from advancing in society. But why do we have to meet in the first place? I like to repeat myself from last time. Japan has a devastating record in the global gender gap of the World Economic Forum. And for a G7 country, it is hard to digest that Japan ranks on place 147 out of 153 countries in the field of political empowerment. And in addition to that, Japan has the second largest pay gap of the OECD countries. So this all speaks for itself. Again, tonight, as I'm seeing, we are attracting quite a number of participants, which shows us how timely and important the discussion on advancing women and their cause, as well as raising their voices in Japan is. Since you can only discuss that much at a time, we focused tonight on women in society. Out of the 3-tier event series, so 2 are yet to come. What you should all look forward to tonight is the comparison between Japan and Norway. Norway has developed into one of the most progressive and women-supportive societies. We will ask which policies, mindsets, legal provisions, and demands have helped Norway to advance itself and to be a role model country. In a comparative mode, we will discuss Japan's lack of progress and fallbacks in the recent years. In the end of tonight, we should be able to see if any of Norway's initiatives can be helpful for Japan's lawmakers and government to issue supporting policies. So I look forward to the next 90 minutes of insightful discussions, and more so I am happy to announce our distinguished moderator tonight, Ms. Shiori Kano. Kano Sensei served in the House of Representatives for 3 terms. She's one of the few Japanese women who engaged in foreign affairs. Consequently, she was a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the co-chair of Interparliamentary Alliance in China. Kano Sensei is one of the front-runner women for women empowerment in Japan, and I'm really glad she's joining us tonight again. She is also involved in various global forums as a human rights activist and a lawyer, and I'm glad we can present her tonight again as our moderator. It is my honor now to hand over the microphone to you, Kano Sensei, and I would like to leave the introductions of the speakers to you. We feel very privileged to have such renowned key experts and activists with us today. Kano Sensei, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rabia. I'm Shiori Kano. I'm very honored to be the facilitator for this second in the series of the Women in Japan lecture, as well as the first one. As introduced, from 2009 to 2021, I was a member of the House of Representatives. I worked on gender policies, especially gender equality in politics, making a goal to have 50% of the candidates be women. We tried to promote that kind of a policy. There are many, it's very difficult for women to find care facilities for their babies so that they can go back to work. I've been trying to emphasize the importance of care centers for children. And some of the men politicians used to criticize me or hoot at me when I was talking about this. Only 1 out of the 10 10 members in the lower house are women now. For 50%, we haven't been able to go beyond this ceiling. We want to increase the number of Japanese politicians and change that consciousness. We want to make a society where everyone is more gender conscious and open-minded. I'm currently a lawyer and am the representative director of the International Humanitarian Platform, and I'm involved in human rights activities in Japan and overseas. Today, we have two experts giving keynote speeches, after which we will have a discussion, and then we will have Q&A with the audience. In the first seminar on women and society, Seiko Nara, and a total of 6 women, including politicians and academics, had an exchange of views. And we talked about the situation of women under COVID and the advantages of flexible work for allowing women to work, but the reality that many women are suffering from having only part-time work. Also, the issue of care has a much larger burden on women than on men, and we discussed about that as well. We also discussed how women policies to promote women's participation in politics and other areas could be more effective. Today, from Norway, we have a Professor Christensen to talk about gender policy in Norway, and Professor Kiryu Minashita will be talking about the situation in Japan, and we will try to think how the successful gender policies of Norway can provide insight for Japan's gender policies. We will also have a time for Q&A in the latter half. The audience is encouraged to use the Q&A chat box to raise any questions they have. It is probably not possible to answer all of your questions, but we will do our best to look at as many questions as possible and respond to the issues that you are most interested in. So first, I would like to invite Professor Kiryu Minashita of Kokugakuin University to give a talk about the situation in Japan in about 15 minutes. Thank you for your introduction. I am Minashita. Please allow me to share the PowerPoint slide set that I have prepared. Can you see my PowerPoint slides? Yes, we can. I'm really honored to be invited to this second session after also being invited to the first session. I thought I would introduce myself, but there isn't much time, so I will just be brief. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Economics in Kokugakuin University. I've written a number of books, such as Men Who Have No Place to Live and Women Who Have No Time. I also wrote a book about the poverty of single mothers. If you're interested in what I taught, please access my profile page in my university and also have a look at some of the books that I have written. Let me proceed to look back on what we discussed at the previous session, the situation in Japan. The proportion of women in many areas is very low. Especially women are not able to join decision-making bodies. We talked about that last time. After the symposium last time, we thought we wanted to look at the cultural and social aspects of the gender issue in Japan, and I'd like to focus on that this time. Let's think how Japan's gender model developed historically and culturally. We'll think about that. First, Japan was modernized and became democratic quite late. There was a major reformation And modernization was done in a top-down method from the end of the 19th century. And modernization was more or less a process of westernization, and that led to some distortions, for instance, in politics. And it was easy to import policies of politics and military and economy, but the aspects of the family system could not be easily imported. That led to distortions. And in the process of democratization and modernization after World War II, the 1950s to the 1970s, we had an annual economic growth of more than 9%. At that time, in about 20 years, we suddenly jumped into the age of being a modern country. And there was a lot of backlash from that sudden modernization process. And the cultural and psychological stance of people could not keep up with the rapid changes in society and economy. I can go back even further, but I could even go back to the 10th century if I wanted to, but it would take too much time. So I will just look at a recent history. In the feudal, we'll think about changes from the Edo era, which was a feudal system, through the Meiji Reformation until today. In the Edo period, which is a feudal age, the main virtue that a woman was expected to have was written out in a book called Onna Daigaku based on Confucianism. It was said that the role of women is to be obedient. And the thinking was that it's better for women to be illiterate because if they can read, they will just be bothersome. At that time, around in the end of the 19th century, 80% of the population was either farming or fishing. Most people lived in farming communities or fishing communities. 80% of the population of Japan was in the primary industry in the end of the 19th century. The life stage for a woman was to first get married and go to her husband's house, and then she would have children, and she would become a housewife once she is given the right to manage her own kitchen. And then when the children leave the nest and the husband died, she would be living like a retiree. At that time, the concept of a housewife was someone who had the right to control the distribution of food in the house and would be engaged in labor related to food, clothing, and shelter. The term a full-time housewife was only used in the 1970s. Before that, the housewife would be involved in farming and other farming activities while sharing life together with the extended family. The housewife's main role was to manage the food. So housework wasn't the only role. The housewife also had to manage any servants or people hired in the household. And the housewife would also be involved in making the food for the family. This system of the household controlling the finances of the house was carried on by the so-called allowance system of the salaried households in Japan now. When the husband is working as a salaried worker, usually the husband gives all of his money into the account that is controlled by the wife, and the wife would just give 20 or 30,000 yen as an allowance to the husband. That is the way that households are managed in Japan. So the wife is not working in the labor, but the wife did have a very large influence to control the strings of the purse of the family. So housewives would be a target for marketing because they controlled the finances of the house. In the Meiji period, at the end of the 19th century, an interesting new word came out. It's called good wife and wise mother. The term wise was applied to women for the first time ever in Japanese history. This was a very remarkable thing. In the past, women were considered best to be illiterate, but now the idea was that the woman should be a good wife and a wise mother and raise, a very well-developed children for the society. This was at a time when Japan was competing to become a large power, militarily and otherwise. And Japan was thinking what other countries had and Japan didn't have. And they realized that education of women was a weak point. So they came up with a new concept of education for women, typical to Japan. So this is the historical complex created by Japan's unique modernization process. It was focused on nationalism, but it was based also on a Confucian image of women, where the woman must be obedient to the father, who is the head of the house. And it also had a concept of the image of women in the early folk society, modern folk society. And also it had some concepts of the women of the West. In 1898, the Meiji Civil Code established a family system, and the wife was deprived of any kind of legal capacity. That was abolished with the amendment of the Civil Code in 1947. And before that, in 1945, women were allowed to participate in national politics, and then women got local suffrage in 1946. But the level of women's participation in politics is still very low. Though there is women's suffrage, there have been social and cultural breaks preventing women from participating in politics. But the more Confucianist or feudalistic laws of the pre-war period were changed after World War II. After World War II, a new type of housewife, who is a full-time housewife, emerged. And the ideal of the partnership of the husband and wife changed at that time. In Japan, there wasn't the concept of working together as a couple. There wasn't any case of a husband and wife working together. In the end of the 19th century, various Western policies and systems were adopted in Japan, but the Western concept of a couple, or a man and woman working together to making a household, could not easily be adopted in Japan. In the previous family system, the basis was made. In the Meiji period, under a paternalistic system, the wife was expected to be obedient to her husband like a daughter. But after World War II, the family became a nuclear family and industrialization was advanced. So the wife was considered to be someone who should pamper her husband like a mother. There is a magazine called Fujin Koron that was popular in the 1950s, read by highly educated women, said the following things. Various male and female said that it's important for women to let their husbands depend on them. There was a guy called Kozo Kamori who said this: man is spoiled by his mother, then his sisters, and by his wife. What the man seeks from a woman is a broad and deep affection, like the ocean that envelops him no matter what. The man is grateful to the women because only the women can give this kind of selfless love to him. Even after the mother is replaced by a wife, it is this kind of gentleness that the men seek from their homes. A man's life is a history of defeat and humiliation. So unless he can heal his emotional wounds at home, he will not have courage to face his work. This is what Shimon Imuri said. So there were a lot of views in women's magazines saying the women should pamper the man. Since the man has to be strong in the public domain, when he goes home, he should be able to be pampered and treated, allowed to depend on his wife at home. After World War II, the power relations between the husband and wife changed, and new systems emerged under the new constitution. So this collapsed power relationship led to, on surface, equal rights between men and women, but there are very few jobs that women could actually take on. And the actual status of women was low in the post-war period, even though on paper they were in the same, had equal rights. And various cultural mechanisms changed. So the idea was that the image of the husband and wife was projected into the image of a mother and child. And the wife is supposed to pamper their husband like a child. That's in 1950s, after World War II, 50% of workers were engaged in farming, fishing, or forestry. But from the 1955 to the 1970s, there was a rapid economic growth, which was driven, of course, by secondary industries, mainly construction and manufacturing. Women changed from being the housewife of a farmhouse to the housewife of a salaried worker's home. The husband would work in the market and the wife would look after the house. That was the common pattern during the high-speed economic growth period. This led to popularization of full-time housewives, and there were some benefits for the women in this. Even today, women themselves feel like it's not their role to be involved in politics or in the industry. But during the rapid economic growth period after World War II, the housewives have gained something. There was rapid economic growth, and society was very stable during the so-called Showa period after World War II. Compared to the life before World War II, there were some advantages for the women. For instance, the wife was no longer, bound by all of the in-laws. She didn't have to, be bossed around by her mother-in-law and do a lot of hard work in the fields. In other words, the housewives in the industrial sector were liberated from the double work of paid and unpaid work. However, in order to have this kind of gender division of labor, the husband's income has to exceed the actual expenditure of the household. In the Meiji period, Taisho period, and early Showa period, it was actually difficult. Only if the husband was working in, the industrial sector could the wife be freed from the paid work. It was only the elites who could, wives who could be full-time housewives. So people working in the factory were typical. In 1890s, the value of the husband's income was divided by actual expenditure for the household was 0.8. That increased to 0.9 in 1920 and increased to 1.03 by 1931. So it was not possible for the husband to feed the family with his wage income alone before World War II. But after World War II, with the rapid economic growth, it became possible for the husband to support the household. And it became popular to have full-time housewives. Before World War II, it was only the elite people, families, who could be full-time housewives. But that became possible also for people who were just in the middle classes. But from the 1980s to the 1990s, a rapid change occurred again. There was an increase of double earner households. Here, blue is the households where there are two earners. Red is the one where only the husband is working. From the 1990s, the dual wage households have been increased. And actually, there are 6.6 million more dual earner households than single earner households in Japan now. This is due to the slowing down of the increase of pay hikes. It's very difficult to maintain the household unless the wife also works. And the main industry has changed from the secondary industry to the tertiary industry. There's more work which requires labor. So there are more workplaces for women to work in, and women have higher education levels than before. So there are more households with two earners now than before in the 80s. But most of the work that the women get is part-time work, not full-time work. At the previous symposium, I also mentioned that there's there's an increase in part-time female workers, but there are very few women getting increase. There's little increase in full-time work for women. So the women who work part-time in the labor market have to do the same level of housework as a full-time housework, housewife. So the double burden is very heavy for them. Here is a comparison of the people in managerial positions. The pink shows the proportion of women in the workforce. In Japan, nearly 50% of the workforce is female. However, it's only 14.8% of women of the managerial positions that are held by women, which is much lower than the other OECD countries. So women have to bear a very heavy burden, but they're not allowed to participate in decision making. Why does that happen? It's because of statistical discrimination, we can say. Dr. Akira Kawaguchi wrote about this in his book, Gender and Economic Disparity. In Japan, male can get a higher salary just because they are men. This is regardless of the level of job performance. There is a tendency for men to get a higher wage than women for the same level of work. So more capable women will tend to move on to other companies where they can get better conditions. Meanwhile, men who have relatively low ability know that they won't be able to get the same level of salary if they change their job. So they tend to want to cling on to their current job and not change their job. So what happens is everybody just tries to avoid any problems and they cling to their current work. As a result, that leads to a lot of relatively incapable men being in the same workplace, making conservative organizations that are very conservative and are not able to do innovation. On the long term, this can lead to declining business performance. The gender inequality issue is a serious problem in Japan. One aspect is institutional inertia. Since the institutions of society are so highly fixated, it's not possible for the organizations to change and to adopt rational solutions. On the other hand, in Japan, most of the burden of care work is on the shoulders of women. The average work hours of men in Japan is 6 hours, 49 minutes, and women have an average work hours of 4 hours and 47 minutes. However, in terms of housework, women work five times longer than men in housework. If you add the paid and unpaid work, men work an average of 7 hours and 33 minutes, but women work 8 hours and 15 minutes. So women work 42 minutes longer than men if you add up paid labor and housework. But there's a big difference in the amount of time spent on housework. married women spend about 5 times as much time for housework as they would have when they were unmarried, for shopping, looking after their children. If the total amount of work for Japanese couples is set at housework is set at 100, women bear more than 85% of the total housework burden. That hasn't changed for 20 years. And now, since women have to also go back into the labor market, the double work burden is increasing for the Japanese women. Our society is increasing the burden on women, while the Abenomics talked about promoting women advancing in the workplace, but without changing the burden on women, without changing the way that men do nothing in the house, the government has been trying to promote Japanese women going into the work market more. That leads to extreme pressure on women. I wrote about the life course that the government is recommending Japanese women to take. You could describe it this way. In Japan, now, if a man wants to be successful in marriage, work, childhood, and childcare, she would have to do the following. There was an idea of having the women's notebook, right? But now the population is decreasing and women are getting later than later. So once you are over 35, it's very difficult to have a child. So women have to plan their life course so that they can have 1 or 2 children before they're 35. The idea was that women should have a notebook to plan their life that way, which is none of if you want to achieve this, you have to find a job at a family-friendly company by the time you graduate from university, and then you have to find a potential spouse before you're 25 years old. In Japan, on average, it takes 4 years for you to actually reach marriage with your boyfriend or girlfriend. So you have to find your partner by the time you're 25, and you have to get them to propose to you within 3 years. According to Recruit Company, more than 80% of the couples in Japan have to have the proposal from the men's side. So the woman would have to get engaged at 28, get married at 29, get pregnant at 30, and have her first baby by 31. So she only has 12 ovulations in that period of 1 year to have a baby. And from the time she's pregnant, she has to find daycare for her baby, and then she'll go back to the workplace when she's 32, and she'll have to wean her child within 1 year in order to restore ovulation. And then she needs to have conceive her second child by the time she's 33. And she'll have to find a daycare for the second child. And she'll have her second child at age 34 and then aim for a managerial position. In order to achieve this, you have to have enough of a career by the time you're 30 to be able to get maternity care and child care without facing maternity harassment. So I think that actually Japan's act on promotion of women's participation and advancement in the workplace is really a plan demanding women to be super women. To summarize, the current situation of gender is a result of the distortion due to fast modernization, which also affects men. And modernization being westernization also led to some adverse effects. Statistical discrimination, unconscious bias, and persistent institutional inertia have been problems. The cost of change is very high. There's a lot of peer pressure in Japan and intolerance to individual freedom because there's a focus on responsibility of the family. So women are forced to bear burden at the workplace, but they're not able to join decision making. In order to overcome all of this, and for women to become successful in society, it is extremely difficult. So we have many issues piled up. So I hope we can have a discussion on what should be done about this. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So in order to attain the gender equality, it seems that only women get a lot of homework and to materialize the gender equality. And I think there's a lot of problem in the Japanese societies, and I feel very much for what is presented. And now you've learned the current situation of surrounding Japanese women. Then I would like to call upon Professor Christensen, and from the gender policy from the Norway, which is deemed as the pioneer country in terms of the gender policy. And now we'd like the Professor Christensen to share the situation in Norway so that we can discuss from both Japan and Norway side.
Thank you so much, and good morning from Norway. My name is Guro Christensen. First of all, I would very much like to thank the organizer for inviting me to this webinar to present my work on gender equality in Norway and to take part in discussions on gender roles in contemporary Japan. Before I start, it's important for me to say that I am not at all an expert on the situation of women in Japan or on Japanese gender roles. Even though I find Japan very fascinating and I hope to go back very soon, I have only visited the country once in 2017 when I was part of a delegation of faculty from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology who traveled to Japan with the aim to establish a research network. For me and my colleague, this visit was very fruitful as we were introduced to a group of renowned gender researchers at Mizu University in Tokyo. And together with this group of researchers, we have been able to develop two projects, both of which enable mobility of faculty and students between Norway and Japan as the main activity. And the first project is funded by the Norwegian Research Council, and the second one by the Norwegian Directorate of Higher Education. Unfortunately, so far, these projects have been heavily affected by the pandemic as traveling quickly became very challenging. What we have managed to do is to write an anthology, which is called Comparative Perspectives on Gender Equality in Japan and Norway. It's co-edited by Professor Masako Ishii-Kunz from Mizu University and Priscilla Ringrose and myself from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. For information, the anthology is open access and we welcome all readers. Most of the chapters in this book have both Norwegian and Japanese authors, which is not always given in transnational research. And as an editor, I would say that we have learned a lot from this collaboration. For me personally, learning about gender roles in a society that has hitherto unknown to me has been very formative. However, what I think has been most important is what I learned about Norway, my own country, in carrying out this comparative analysis. And this brings me to my presentation about gender equality and gender roles in Norway. As you probably know, Norway, along with the other Scandinavian countries, is perceived as a pioneer nation in gender equality. Also, gender equality is at the core of Norwegian cultural identity and as such is an important part of Norwegian self-presentation in an international context. Historically, Norway's main strategies for achieving gender equality has been twofold. On the one hand, it is to increase the opportunities available to women by strengthening women's economic independence through increasing their labor market participation. And on the other hand, to encourage and normalize men's involvement in domestic and care work. The result of such strategies has been a system and a culture where both genders are expected to participate in the workforce and in home life, which is often labeled the dual earner, dual carer model for gender equality. What these two strategies or strands of strategies have in common is far-reaching political regulation, which in many cases have been suggested by and fought by the women's liberation movement and their male allies. And measures that have been used, and this list is of course not complete. This is protection against discrimination in all areas by law, including education, school, and working life. And for example, this has contributed to a family-friendly working life and also focus on political representation. Another measure is equal pay for equal work. Then we have the gender quotas, which have been used both in corporate boards and in unbalanced study programs in terms of both students and faculty composition, and also in higher position and leading positions. Then we have the family policies, which of course are very important, and they have been an important part of the welfare state policies, and they include a long list of different measures. For example, the parental leave, which in Norway today is 49 weeks in 100% salary or 59 weeks with 80% salary. And these are to be divided between the parents. We also have comprehensive childcare arrangements and auto-school care. And today, 90% of children between the age of 1 and 5 go to kindergarten. We also have the taxation system that benefits families and makes it possible to both women and men to go to work even though they have children. We have family benefits, benefits for lone parents, and the aim of these policies have been to support parents and children to make it possible to combine paid work with family life also for women. Another measure which is important is the father's quota, which was introduced as early as 1993, but then only 4 weeks, and now it's 15 weeks. And the key point here is that these weeks are withdrawn if the fathers do not take them. And then we also have the attitude campaigns, which I've called them, which are various kinds of campaigns, both socially and culturally, aimed at countering gender stereotypes, expectations, attitudes, and practices, both when it comes to education, occupation, and leadership positions. Then, these have had some achievements, and today Norwegian women's current employment rate is nearly as high as men's. We have also much more women in leadership positions than we used to have, and we have a more equal sharing of both paid and unpaid work among fathers and women, mothers, or between women and men. However, despite increased promotional policies supporting the dual carer, dual earner model of gender equality, it is still primarily women who adjust their participation in working life to accommodate their partner's careers and the family's needs. It is also still more women than men who work part-time work. We still have a highly gender-segregated labor market, which is a paradox and something that researchers are really working hard in Norway to explore and understand. And it's still women who do more housework than men, whereas men do more maintenance work. And also research finds that women are reported to be considerably more dissatisfied with the distribution of household labor than men are. One way to understand this list of still inequalities is to include that the dual carer, dual earner model is difficult to achieve in practice, and that the normative basis of this model and its position in hegemonic discourses on gender equality are more contentious than they are often expressed in the story of gender equal Norway. One trend that could be cited in support of this suggestion is the recent increase in paid migrant domestic labor. After a long period in which having live-in young women helping out with cleaning, caring, and cooking was a normal way to organize family life in Norway, the post-war era, that is after 1945, with its social democratic ideology and comprehensive welfare model, introduced a strong focus on gender equality and sobriety, and also on social equality, and an explicit negative attitude towards social hierarchies and servitude. As a result, hiring outside help to assist with domestic tasks and childcare was frowned upon and seen negatively. However, and this is very important, I think, in recent years, this seemed to have changed as paid domestic labor is yet again becoming more widespread, though with a global twist, as many new domestic laborers are women from other parts of the world, often the global south or the Eastern Europe, either as home cleaners from Eastern Europe or as au pairs, primarily from the Philippines, and they are doing cleaning, caring, and cooking in Norwegian private homes. Typically, the migrant domestic laborers are employed with conditions that clearly violate Norwegian labor law and establish standards for decent employer-employee relations. As a result, the au pair regime, for example, is currently under scrutiny and at the risk for possible dissolution. And in the remaining presentation, only a few minutes, I would like to reflect upon the concurrence of a strong political and cultural focus on gender equality and the increasing occurrence of paid migrant domestic labor, which is characterized by a fundamental social inequalities. And my questions are, does the implementation of the dual care, dual earner model for gender equality in Norway rely on global inequalities and national and racial hierarchies? And does the dual care, dual earner model for gender equality facilitate the reproduction of social and national racial hierarchies that contradicts the strong political and cultural ideal of social equality? And together with some colleagues, I have conducted research on paid migrant domestic labor in Norway for several years. And my role in this project has been to interview Norwegian couples who are employing either home cleaning services or au pairs. And what I found in this research is that paid migrant domestic labor can be seen as an available and effective way to live up to the ideal of the dual care model of gender equality and to solve some of its challenges. In particular, paid migrant domestic labor seems to be made possible the implementation of the dual earner organization of the family life without compromising the expectation for parenting and the household. Paid migrant domestic labor I also found that paid migrant domestic labor smoothed the implementation of the dual carer aspect of gender equality by reducing the number of tasks to be divided between husband and wife, and hence preventing too much inequality and conflict within the couple. And together, my claim would be that Norwegian employers of domestic services are essentially buying themselves the opportunity to live up to the ideal of the dual earner dual carer model of gender equality. However, as the migrant domestic laborers are employed with conditions that clearly violate Norwegian labor law and established standards for decent employer-employee relations, it also means that gender equality is given priority over social equality, and the implementation of the dual earner dual carer model for gender equality is relying on global inequalities and national and racial hierarchies. Moreover, as the domestic laborers are mostly women, I find that the gendering of domestic labor as female is reproduced by this way of organizing family life. So, to conclude, as a gender researcher and a feminist and an anti-racist, I am very critical towards this way of solving or achieving gender equality. And I would strongly argue for other ways of organizing and succeeding in gender equality. And for me, from the Norwegian context, what we have learned is strong political regulation that are actually forcing organizations, corporations, businesses, leaders, and lay people to challenge gender stereotypes, to choose a way of organizing that is enhancing gender balance in all fields and at all levels have been rather successful. And then I think also it's very, very important to choose ways of doing this that are not compromising with democratic ideals, labor law, and human rights. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Prof. The issue of migrant maids may become a big issue in Japan in the future. So this is a topic we'd like to deepen on in the discussion. We'd like to have a discussion between the two of you, Gro and Kiryu. I would like to suggest some topics to get that discussion between the two of you started. Professor Gro, you said that the Japanese women joining the market of labor helped them to become more independent, and various policies moved ahead to achieve gender equality. For instance, same work pay for same pay for same work, or giving adequate leave for paternity as well as maternity. Japan needs the same thing, but there is an institutional inertia in Japan. Society is so fixated that it's very difficult to make the changes that are needed for a gender equal society, was mentioned by Kiryu-san. I'd like to have you discuss this point first. What can lead politicians to propose policies, and how did those policies actually get adopted? Were there women leaders who were able to drive that process? What was the social background that made it possible for these gender equality policies in Norway to actually become successful, which hasn't been possible in Japan?
Thank you so much for this very challenging question. I think this is really at the core of what needs to be discussed. I think, of course, there is no easy solution or quick fix on this issue. And as from the outside, my view of the Japan context is that something is about to happen. There are a lot of educated, strong women fighting for their rights. There's also much more internationalization and collaboration with the outside world that is pushing Japan towards more gender equality. From the outside also, I think that the situation with the elderly of the population and the low fertility rates means actually that there is a huge need for more labor force in the Japan context. And I think maybe that is the possibility for women actually to enter into the labor market and be part of the employment. And also then, of course, it's really important that the regulations are securing benefits so that it's possible to combine it with family life, but also this equal pay for equal work. So strong regulation. But of course, more women in policy is important also to secure the regulations of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Mineshita, we need full-fledged equal pay for equal work in Japan. And that is necessary in order for men to also play a better role in house care. The Japanese politicians know that's necessary, but haven't been able to achieve it. Professor Mineshita, what is your suggestion on achieving real change? What is the key to making a change? And And Gro, if you have anything to say to Kiryu, please let us know. Oh, this is a very challenging issue. Kano-san, as you said, there isn't a magic wand to solve the issue. I've been thinking why it's difficult to have diversity in Japan and why it's so difficult for diverse people to work together in Japan up to now, including men and women cooperating with each other. There are some external factors. In recent years, the norms in international society have changed dramatically. A good example was the Olympics of last year. All kinds of discrimination towards minorities is no longer accepted in international society. So various kinds of strong, powerful cultural influences from us outside are being applied to Japan. And globalization is making it necessary so Japan can no longer ignore what happens overseas. Also, the investors are also demanding ESG, more conscious management. And this trend is inevitable. The clock is never going to go back. So Japan has to keep up with the trends in the world. Externally, there are many such factors, but internally, aging and depopulation is an urgent issue. With a change of the law, foreign workers are being allowed more into Japan, though they're not recognized as migrants. But the people that Japan wants are not coming in from overseas. It seems the labor market in Japan is not that attractive anymore for people from other countries. The people in the working age bracket is becoming less and less. So finding enough labor or workers is a big challenge. I've been teaching a lot of foreign students at my university, but many of them come to Japan, loving Japan, and they learn Japanese language and culture, but these exchange students have great difficulty getting a working visa. They have to have some specialization. They have to work in the field that they specialize in their university. In Japan, in university, there isn't a high level of specialization. Many people will learn, study economics, but end up working in a manufacturer. But for the foreign students to get a job in Japan, they have to find a job in the area that they studied, or they won't be able to get a working visa. It's really unreasonable. Though they have studied hard to learn Japanese language and culture, these foreign exchange students, who should be a welcome people, are having a great difficulty finding jobs in Japan, not to speak of simple laborers. I feel really depressed about the situation and the prospect. It's not that the issues of women that we need to think about. Other people who are not mainstream in the past need to be accepted into Japanese society, but the government is not determined to do that. And in terms of diversity, gender equality is one of the aspects of diversity, but it is not relatively less important. Gender equality is extremely important when we think about human rights. So, gender equality is like the hub for respecting human rights. And gender equality is also important for reproduction and making our next society. And gender equality is relevant to everybody. But in the area of politics and policy, it's not so easy to raise the issue of gender equality. If the politicians give a speech on the streets about gender equality, many people ignore them. This is an issue we need to think of as everybody's problem. It's not irrelevant to anybody, but For this reason, I try to raise it wherever I have a chance to talk. People need to think of gender equality as a issue very close to the heart and relevant to all of us. We need to emphasize how urgent it is to address the issues of gender equality, which are relevant to everybody. So I try to raise the issue from a perspective that people can easily relate to, but often it's hard to get the people to really relate to it. Professor Gro, in Norway, are gender issues mainstream for politicians? Are gender issues considered a mainstream topic for politics? In Japan, you really couldn't say that gender is a mainstream issue, can you, Professor Miyashita? I'm not the person to say this to you, Kano-san, but if we, until recently, if you even raise the topic of gender equality, the other politicians might hoot you or blame you. It's an issue that many people just completely ignored, or they would kind of try to switch the issue into something different. It was considered just an issue for inside the house and nothing to be discussed publicly. That was a big problem. Mr. Kano, you raised the problem of the lack of care centers for children, for women to go back to work. I was writing a series of articles in Nikkei at the time. Nowadays, there's a big change because journalists in the politics area are starting to raise the issue of the lack of care centers. Before that, the issue of the care center for children was only covered in the family life section of the newspaper. Only recently, the shortage of care centers has become an issue that the political journalists take seriously. This, I don't know how many people are sensing this change, but there is even in mainstream articles, the gender issues and the issues of the shortage of care centers are being taken up. Both the ruling party and the opposition party recognize the need. They have to address the issues for children in the next generation. It's just a very small change, but I think we have to recognize some small but significant change. That's how I look at it. Thank you. Bro, as Minashita Sensei said, the issue of the shortage of daycare centers became a central political issue very recently only. In Norway, when did gender issues be captured as a core issue for society and taken seriously by everybody? And what was it that led to gender issues being taken seriously by society in general?
I think for the first part of your question, I think it's in particular from the 1970s, and then it was the women's liberation was very strong in Norway, and a lot of these women also had strong allies in their husbands and fathers. So together it became a huge movement which really fought hard for all rights for human. It was to have the right for abortion, the right for equal pay for equal work, for more kindergartens, for after-school arrangements, and for more leadership positions and political representation. So this was really hard fights for decades. Today, I would say that the average situation, the overall situation, is that everyone more or less would agree in Norway that gender equality is really important, and all political parties would argue that this is something they would support. However, of course, there are differences between the politicians and political parties, how high on the agenda they would put gender equality, but I think it's impossible to be elected as a politician if you say that you are not supporting gender equality. So today it's really an important something to be supported by everyone.
I see. And one more question. In Norway, about this migrant household workers, I have a question about that. So there's something that I would like Professor Christensen to elaborate. So in the migrant policy, well, they are supporting the families to be happier in a sense, but then how would you think that they will affect the gender equality worldwide in their presence? And so there's the ambivalent situation surrounding this use of the paid migrant household workers. And so I believe that this is upcoming issues for the society and also for the world society as well. What is the possible direction for this ambivalent presence of the gender equality, dual earner, dual carer, as opposed to the having this this parity in a sense between the countries and races?
Yes, I think this is an upcoming topic, and as I have learned from the Japanese context also over the last weeks, I can see that this is also becoming an issue in Japan. I think what we have already learned from the Norwegian context is that it's not really something that will promote gender equality in the long term. It's a really short-term fix, and actually that is having severe problems and challenges also. So as I ended my talk, I think I really do not think that is the solution to the gender equality problem or paradox. I think if paid migrant domestic labor or paid domestic labor should be part of the solution, it needs to be very strictly regulated so that all migrants are paid in a good way, and also that they are supported and protected by labor law. But anyway, like what we see also, that if you have other women, because these migrant domestic laborers would more or less always be women, when they enter the private sphere, it seems as if men tend to disappear, or at least they are not encouraged to enter the sphere. And I think that is a huge problem. So I think it should be substitutional. I think it's a better solution for gender equality that support systems are public and available to everyone and strictly regulated. So I hope for the future of Japan that this will not be the solution, but rather that the couples and the genders are forced to collaborating on both the paid labor and unpaid domestic labor, so it's equal between the couples. And I think that as Japan now obviously are lacking labor in society, I hope women will be encouraged to fill these positions by the help of their husbands.
Thank you very much, Professor Minister. So when we say the household labor, it has a lot of elements encompassed, and in comparison to other developed nations, the household work that the Japanese women take are very detailed and is of a very high quality, and so it is not shared. So the wife alone is doing it. It is not about the gardening together or cooking together or cleaning together. So it's only women who does all of this. And in the group study that I'm involved in, this is the project between the UK and Japan. When we say household work, for instance, in UK, what's important is the interior layout and also the gardening. And so these are considered important part of the shared, in a sense, a hobby, which makes the household, the family life more enhanced. But in Japan, the household work means the cooking nutritious food, and that's for the most part. And so basically, the families are very closed society, and so what is basically done by women is different between the societies. So we need to have that point of view to make a reform. And so as long as this the system works, that's fine. But Japan is now facing the super aging and the super low birth rate. And so when something happens or the trouble happens, Japan has to a certain extent a culture to help each other. But then in Japan, they tend to rely on the family members rather than the community members, and then they think it is shameful to have to rely on the people outside of the family, and so the sense of family is becoming smaller and smaller because of the aging, and and the people who can bear the labor of the household work and the child rearing is getting less and less. And as Professor Christensen said about the migrant workers, and I found it very interesting. And in terms of the human rights perspective, we think it is a very difficult problem because there are some countries. It is a hard fact that the women's lifestyle is very much supported by these migrant workers, paid workers. But in Japan, a lot of women find it difficult to have someone from outside of the family to do the household work. And so in 1960s, and there used to be, it wasn't rare that well-to-do families have the maids at home or the household workers at home, but because of the acute economic growth, it has been forgotten. And so in Japan, the changes happen in the society drastically, but it was so drastic during the period of the rapid economic growth. They tend to forget about what it used to be like before the economic growth. And so when people say, well, the Japanese nationals tend to do as everybody else does, and more powerfully than any other nationals. And while solving the systemic problems, we also need to drive the cultural and societal changes, and it will not be impossible, I think. Thank you very much. So the questions so far included some of the questions that we received from the audience. And in fact, we only have 15 more minutes to go. And now we would like to take as many questions as possible from the audience. So then we would like the two speakers to answer in a precisely.
質問なんですけれども、ノルウェーにはもやはりまだ課題が残っているということ。
Norway also has some remaining challenges.
育児や介護に対する責任感、これを本当に養うために
What is necessary to get the men in Norway to feel responsible for house care? There is still occupational segregation by gender in Norway as well, or not? That was the question. Did you answer that?
Thank you. Yes, as I mentioned, we have a gender gap also in the occupational system in Norway. We have in care sector, like in all care work, we have much more women, and in the construction sector, we have much more men. So the educational system is continuously working on different campaigns to recruit a more balanced, gender balanced group of students, because we have a clear aim that all study programs should ideally be rather gender balanced. But this has been very challenging. But I think the cultural and societal campaigns that have been going on, seem to have some effect also. And when it comes to the first part of the question about this having men to take responsibility within the family and the home, what we see is that this paternity leave quotas have been very important. That when men are like mildly forced to stay at home with the children for up to 15 weeks, and some parents, they can also choose to stay longer at home, maybe even 7 months, we can see that their whole attitude is really changing, and they feel really responsible to taking care of the home situation. But of course, this then it's absolutely necessary that the woman of the house also is able to let go, that she leaves room for the husband and also lowers some of her expectations about how it should be done. Because of course, in some of the families, we see that men are fighting quite hard to actually be allowed into the house in this responsible situation, to be able to have more than a few weeks paternity leave, so that there really is also a struggle between the genders. So I think to succeed, women also have to let go of some of their responsibilities and leadership positions within the house also.
The Papa quota system has started in Japan as well, learning from Scandinavia, but we need to make it more effective. That is clear. Professor Mineshita, there's another issue of Japan, I believe, that of suicides. The suicide rate, especially among young women, is increasing. What are the causes for this, and what can we do about it? In 2020, under COVID, the suicides by men reduced 0.1%, but suicides of women increased 15%, and that was a big issue in the news. Everyone was shocked by the increase in female suicides under COVID. Could you share your thoughts on the increase in suicides by young working women, and what can we do about it? Thank you. This is a very heart-wrenching issue. Under COVID, women who are less than 40 years old are committing suicide more than before. In Japan, the rate of suicide has been high from a long time, especially there are a high number of suicides both in men and women in Japan. That is a big issue, but that is the assumption. Why is it that in recent years, women in the working and child-rearing age are committing suicide? Under COVID, the children haven't been able to go to school, and the women have had to work from home, making the double burden heavier. While cooking 3 times a day for the children, they have to work nearly full-time online from home. That's a big burden for them. In the past, they had few opportunities to work on the house together with their husbands. And the women in households had little experience of sharing housework. So whenever the husband was at home, then the wife felt she had to take care for her husband and the children. So when the husband is working from home, it increases the burden for the wife. According to conscience surveys, men say they would like to be more involved in childcare, but in reality, they're not actually participating more in child work. And also, children are not helping out with chairs. In Japan, the chores have to be done at a very high level so that the children are not able to help it very well. Usually, it's only the women who are able to do that kind of work. With the increase in remote work, the happiness of men has increased, but the happiness of women has declined. Care work of, cleaning the house and taking the children, taking care of children has become an increased burden. Employment of women has declined under COVID because it's usually the part-time workers that get cut from their jobs. In Abenomics, there was an increase in women working in the market. About 3 million women workers increased, but most of those workers were casual labor, and most of those jobs disappeared. The casual jobs disappeared under COVID. Even though the women increase their burden, they're not able to participate in decision making. And under a exceptional or urgent situation, many of the women get fired from their jobs, and many of them lose their basis for their livelihood as a result. In both paid and unpaid work spheres, women are being driven into a corner. In my initial presentation, I touched upon this point. In Japan, when an issue comes up, they think that they can solve the problem by having the women solve the problem as a firefighter. But normally, both men and women should be working in the areas where they have their capability or aptitude. The solution should be achieved by applying people where their aptitude is. But gender segregation is very high in Japan. And that's also affected, and that gender's division of work is more effective, is more powerful than the power of education. So even if women make a big effort, their effort does not pay out. When society becomes unstable, like now, it's like the women who are in the third class section in the Titanic, so to speak. So the women are the first who are, cut off or forced to bear the burden. In a crisis situation, many people who are suffering end up committing suicide. It just shows what a difficult situation the women are in now. So the issue of preventing suicide needs to be reviewed from the perspective of gender and equality. However, that is not easily done. Applying the gender perspective to various policies has not been easy to do. Women who are in the child raising years having to suffer so much is a very severe crisis that the society needs to take more seriously. Professor Bro will not only has the life change. How has the change of lifestyle under COVID affected the gender issues, and how has it affected life in the family in Norway?
So far, the research shows that it has been a backlash for the gender equality, that more women have taken more responsibility on the home situation and childcare and domestic work, but we hope that we can counter this rather quickly, and that the gender balance that was already achieved before the COVID situation is so solid so that it's not severely affected.
I see in Norway as well, the similar increase in burden for women is happening. So, and this next question is the last question to both professors, and now almost time is up. So I would like to make it a closing by listening to your answers. And so this is a comment and a question. So about the Dr. Merkel, who is considered as the very talented politicians, and how do you think that we can use her position to the women politicians to improve their women's position? In Norway, you had the women prime minister. So was there a positive impact on the women's situation? And or is it because the prime minister was a woman or something else? So including that, could you answer, including the closing comment? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I think Norway had the first women prime minister quite a long ago. It was in the 1980s. I think this prime minister position has maybe not been the most important, but today we have about 50% of the ministers are women. So it's always an aim for the government to have gender balance in the government. And I think that has been important because they've stand out as role models, and they also have created a culture that like all political representations or boards should have a gender balance. So, and by this I think I will end my participation in this very interesting panel discussions, which I've really enjoyed being part of, to say that even though Norway has achieved a lot in some decades, there's a lot of fight still to go through for women and the women's liberation movement. So it's not everything. We have a lot of gender inequality paradoxes. And I think also it's important that every country needs to find their own ways also. So this exportation of gender equality system is maybe not the best way to think about it. But I still think international discussions are very important and fruitful for all of us. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. So in Japan, is there a possibility that there will be a women prime minister in Japan? And in order for this first women prime minister to give a positive impact to Japanese society, what do you think would be the condition for this first ever prime minister, Japanese women minister? So what is it? The nickname of Dr. Merkel is the Iron Maiden, Iron Girl, and so when the woman becomes women, then they have to be as tough as steel. They cannot retain their femininity, and so that applies in UK or Germany or even in a Western society. So I wonder how it would be in Japan. So, well, just a regular woman, older or young, becoming a politician to be a policy maker. I think it's going to be difficult. I think a woman to become powerful in a political world would require her to be much stronger than men. And so when we look at the such politicians, I hope that the children will look up to the politicians, men and women, so that they will have hope for making the Japan a better place, or the world a better place. So the same goes to the prime minister, but also so basically the prime ministers and also the ministers are selected out of the old boys club in Japan. So you have to join that first. And so it will make it very difficult for women to become the political leader. And so it has a lot of obstacle in terms of the gender equality. But this means that once Japan becomes good enough to have a woman prime minister, then it may symbolize some change, the fundamental change. But looking at the reality, I cannot help but saying that the situation is quite tough. And so because the woman politician had to be recognized stronger than male politicians to start with. And also we need to also introduce the quota system so as to increase the number of female politicians in Japan. And in particular, in Japan, it is very difficult, tangibly, intangibly, for women to be part of politics. And what's been lost is invisible because nobody thinks it's a problem. And the problem with the gender inequality in Japan is that there's no visualization of the issues. And so when someone points out the issue, he or she becomes a perpetrator for some social unease. And so such problems should be discussed in a symposium such as this one. And we as scholars bear the role for pointing out those problems. And I hope that the seminars and the symposium like this will become more frequent. And we'll have more active discussion. Thank you very much, Professor Christensen, and also Kano-san. And so in Norway, what triggered the gender equality is the women's liberation movement in 1960s, and in Japan in 70s. 70 years after the end of the war, we haven't yet produced the woman prime minister, and Japan cannot be the go our own way. I think there should be some external pressure as well for us to drive the change, which Japanese alone cannot, and so that may bring some positive changes in the future, which is my hope as well. So today, we wanted to answer more questions from the audience, but we had the time limitation. I'm sorry for those who asked questions that was not answered, and but we will certainly keep note of your questions, and I hope that you will be part of the remainder of the series as well. And so this is the second of the webinar series, and so we plan on the third webinar, and so I hope that Dr. Christensen and so the minister will become the members of this webinar by the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. And thank you very much once again to both speakers. And I hope that from Japan, we will deliver you another round of great discussion in the future. Thank you. And I would like to thank the audience for your participation. With this, we would like to conclude the seminar. Thank you.